Hello, lovelies. Today we're going to be talking about Heavy Gear. Now, this is the second edition rulebook, which weighs in at about 240 pages or so. Silhouette system, a grand thing indeed. And this is the fourth edition Heavy Gear rulebook, which I backed on Kickstarter, which weighs in at around 470 pages or so. It's a slab. It's a very hefty book indeed. Now, I've loved the silhouette system, though I haven't got it to the table nearly as much as I would like to, and I have extolled its virtues for many, many years. This doesn't bear much relation to the original game system, really, in a great many ways. And it makes a whole bunch of design choices about which I am not generally very happy. I think I talked about it before. I certainly did talk about Heavy Gear before. I think it was RPG Tour Heavy Gear, when I went through a bunch of the Heavy Gear books I have from previous editions. And I think I talked about this when I got the PDF release, at least a little bit. But let's have a look now that I actually have the physical product and see what I think. I skipped over third edition, but I do have a copy of Silhouette Core somewhere, which was their sort of genericized rules. Now, I've loved the previous editions. Silhouette has always been a fantastic system for the kind of mecha games that DreamPod 9 made their bones on, because it really seamlessly translates between war game, skirmish game, and RPG, and even at bigger scales. Jovian Chronicles, you had starships and mechs and people, and it was easy to transfer between all of it. People forget how popular Heavy Gear really was. I mean, not many RPG properties have had a TV show. Heavy Gear did. One season, 40 episodes, I think, in terrible CGI. Battletech also briefly had a TV series that people forget about. Information is ammunition. It had two computer games in the late 90s, which I remember being pretty good for the time. That was a direct consequence of the Battletech computer game rights reverting, and I think it was Activision at the time. I haven't bothered to look it up, but they wanted a mecha game in their stable that was relatively hard sci-fi and all of that, and Heavy Gear fit the bill. And I remember those games being, as I say, pretty good for the time, though they probably look very crude and primitive to us today. In fact, Heavy Gear might be a great choice for people who are looking to play a different mech-based game, given all the problems that have occurred with Catalyst and so on. Jovian Chronicles is also a good bet, especially if you're more into sort of the Gundam side of things, I suppose. All of their games, apart from Tribe 8, which didn't really have anything like mecha in it, were great for moving between scales and sizes and between wargame and RPG in a way that very few games do. The way the old system worked, you had a number of dice determined by your skill level, 6-sided dice. You rolled them and then you modified the highest number by your stat bonus or penalty. If you got multiple 6s, that added on. Now, it doesn't fall foul of my loathing of needing a 6 to score any sort of success, because numbers 1 to 5 were also useful and could beat the difficulty. It was much more about getting the margin of success than necessarily having to get a 6. If you could stack up everything in your favour, you were going to do pretty well. So otherwise, the dice determined the difficulty. All ones is a botch. Don't have a skill, roll 2 dice, take the lowest one. compare your result to difficulty. That gives you your margin of success, and that's the basis of the whole thing. So a basic, competent, everyday character would typically have 2 dice and then add 1 to the result. So they'd roll 2d6, take the highest one, add 1 to that, and that would give them their success level. And a routine task would only have a difficulty of 2. So to fail, you'd have to roll 2 ones. And that's about a 2% failure rate. You know, that's how I tend to gauge things in games. That's my assessment of how difficult something should be. Someone who is basically trained and basically competent in a particular task should be able to complete that task the vast and overwhelming majority of the time. Right? So your local mechanic at your local garage shouldn't fail when he has to change a tyre. Right? So he shouldn't be having to roll 6s on his dice. So that reflects how well it worked. And vehicle scale was basically times 10 of human scale. And really small vehicles had some special rules, as did really big ones, basically dividing them up into sections. But it was a simple, elegant system, and it worked. And it really worked well at scale. Heavy Gear also had a really strong visual language to it as well. Gislain Barbe and Udon, the art studio, provided all of the art in the older editions. And so it had a really strong and cohesive semi-anime style. A lot of that original art has been used throughout this book, but there is also a lot of other art that just doesn't match up and doesn't carry through that same style and feel and that cohesion, which was really a massive selling point to the old version of Heavy Gear. So briefly on the background of the game, very briefly, it's set on Terra Nova. It's a planet that was settled during an expansionist period from Earth, way back when. Then suddenly all these colonial efforts kind of imploded, Earth disappeared up its own arsehole, and all of its colonies were left to fend for themselves and developed in various ways. Terra Nova is mostly land, with very little in the way of standing water, oceans, whatever. Not so much lakes, yes. So it's dry and arid, lots of land, rough terrain. So that is why the gears, the mechs, basically, but they're more like armored trooper Votoms sort of scale. That's how they came to dominate, and it all makes sense, really, or at least it's plausible enough to hang a game off. Then Earth reappeared on the scene, began to expand again, got rebuffed from certain former colonies, including Terra Nova, where it was a much more hard-run thing. The main political establishments on Terra Nova are the North and the South, and there's an equatorial Badlands between them. They normally fight each other, but when Earth comes along with its hover tanks and starts saying, "Oi, give us all your money," that's when they sort of join forces and fight back. Things are a bit more complicated in this new edition, but I quite like where they've gone with the meta plot, apart from involving all of these other former colony worlds as well. But you'll probably enjoy reading it and catching up to what's been going on in the meta plot yourself, so I won't go too far into it. System-wise, in the new game, you get access to certain skills based on the culture where you grew up. You get traits, aptitudes, quirks, adversities, and stuff from your life path. Then you get points to spend on skills, but you don't really have stats anymore, though your aptitudes can act as sort of like stats. Your skills have to form in a fate-like pyramid. You can't have more higher skills than you've got lower skills at each level. Skills also come in quite broad domains, which are general areas of skill. If you get enough familiarity in skills that are all under the same domain, you can get access to some special capabilities. What were attributes are now perks, no more than plus or minus 3 in total. So while you don't have stats per se, you did kind of have that, a few little slaps and bennies it does make it hard to create a mechanically, meaningfully different character, at least statistically. And for what is a relatively hard sci-fi setting, trying to be somewhat realistic and military sci-fi, feels like an odd choice. I'm not sure that it works. I mean, stat bonuses and penalties were difficult in the original Silhouette system as well, but they were there and they were an underlying assumption of the system, which made sense. The rolling system is also changed. You have a basic dice pool of d6s. You can get reliable dice, which you add to the roll, but then you take away the lowest scoring dice, equal to the extra dice that you've been given, or unreliable dice, which works the opposite way. Difficulties also work differently. The highest possible difficulty is always limited to 6, and any 2 hypothetical difficulty levels over 6 instead takes away a dice from what you get to roll. You always have a base of 1d6, to which your skills and applicable traits add, so you get more and more dice. So far, so good. But now you take the highest roll and you add +1 for any other dice that would be a success over the target number. So, for example, a difficulty 4 task, rolling 2 dice, getting 2 5s would mean a score of 6 and a margin of success of 2. And bonuses now add to dice, not to the totals. So you get extra dice, you don't get to add 1 to whatever you rolled, or whatever. The damage system in the old game involved multipliers. So you might get hit by a weapon or something that would do ×5 damage. So if you got a margin of success of 1, you'd do 5 damage. If you got a margin of success of 2, you'd do 10 damage, 3, 15, and so on. And vehicle scale weapons were basically ×10 human scale weapons, and vice versa. That's not how it works anymore. Now, I appreciate some people maybe have trouble with multiplication, but we all have calculators on us at all times, thanks to mobile phones. So I don't see why they got rid of that, because that was a very elegant way of solving everything. So you no longer get that, but instead, when you damage someone, that damage is expressed as penalty dice attached to descriptive wounds or damage to the vehicle or to the person up until they take their maximum. Now, a person typically has a toughness of 2, so they reduce any incoming damage by 2, and they can take a total of 46 in penalties before they're taken out. Vehicles can take more or less as damage, depending on their hull integrity and their toughness. So this requires you to think an awful lot about damage and effects, because there aren't any sort of tables for this. There are a lot of impetus is upon you as the games master to come up with these various things. And it doesn't scale elegantly anymore, because everything is on the same scale. Basically, you take your successes, add the damage value of the weapon, take away the toughness of the armor and vehicle and whatever's left over is expressed as dice penalties of damage. You split that into chunks, see if you've done enough to overcome their hull integrity or their maximum penalty as a human. If you get over the maximum penalty, they're destroyed. Otherwise, they've got these wounds which don't necessarily always apply, but you could say something like, okay, you've taken heavy damage to your main cannon. Any shots or attacks or anything you make with your main cannon are now at a -2 penalty. And so you get descriptive wounds, which is good for roleplay and so on, but I don't know. It's a bit vague and hand-wavy, and that's a lot of cycles of brain activity that have to go into coming up with all these new forms of damage and wounds and so on, without a great deal of guidance. I mean, there are suggestions, but an optional random table might have been a good idea, perhaps, maybe, possibly, maybe, perhaps. I don't know. And that's it, really. And I'm not even halfway flipping through the book when I've really said all that I have to say on the subject. It is complete. I will give it that. Right, the original main book didn't give you enough in the way of weapons, equipment, vehicles, and so on. Here we get a fairly complete readout on all the different gears, striders, which are like heavy gears, vehicles, and so on, of all the different nations, groups, colony worlds, everything. It's complete. Everything's there. We also get a reasonably good lowdown on all the different factions and countries and so on. The world building was always top notch in Heavy Gear, and it is here. But if you can still get the some of the older books, they'll give you more in-depth information on things like the Mekong Dominion and the Humanist Alliance and all of these other groups, so you can go even more in depth. But this is complete. Everything is here that you need, all in one. So moving on towards conclusions, I guess. In terms of style, this is a definite step down from previous, even though it's full colour, and the previous had black and white interiors for the most part. The artwork is a lot less consistent. There's an awful lot of reused artwork, which was a smart choice, definitely, because the older stuff is just better. The stuff from Gislambub and the Udon group, who I don't think were directly involved this time around. It's mostly seems to be legacy art to me, but it's just not as good. Also, the print quality, the fulfillment of the Kickstarter appears to have been done through Drive-Thru RPG, which means, of course, that it is Ingram Group Lightning Source. It's not that there's a huge difference in quality between Lightning Source and Lulu, but it is enough. The full color art is flattened and made dull and less vibrant than it is even on the cheap color printing that you get via Lulu. The covers are flimsier. I am just, shall we say, not convinced. It's disappointing because this is almost like a relaunch of the game, and yet it shares so little mechanical DNA with the previous editions and Silhouette Core and all the rest. And then artistically, it's missing. it's missing what made the old Heavy Gear such a big draw at the time. And it's not like it's moved on and developed and improved. It's picked over the corpse of Heavy Gear for the juicy bits, the eyeballs and the liver. But it hasn't done anything really fantastic with it. So style-wise, then, a huge disappointment, but it's good to see the old art and the old friends present in here. So 3. Low 3 average. In terms of substance, okay, that is where the book shines to a large degree. It brings together everything. So it's perfect for getting into Heavy Gear without having to hunt down the old books or buy the reprints or whatever else. This will catch you up and get you into the game. However, I don't know how well this new version of the rules and so on I don't know how well it ties into the minis game anymore. I haven't kept up with the minis game. All I know is that the old Heavy Gear, it was easy to swap back and forth. Given the bigger emphasis on the personal scale in this version of the game, I don't know. I doubt it's as compatible as easily. I could well be wrong. I'm willing to be wrong. Anyone who's more familiar with the war game, skirmish game, yeah, feel free to correct me. But it doesn't feel like it has the same level of applicability. I don't much care for the system changes, and there's one really big sin in this book, which is to do with content and usability and so on. I mean, this is a mammoth book. If it were 100 pages or less, I could forgive it, but at this size, the complete absence of an index is death. To the point, given the size and scale of this tome, to the point that the PDF, I would dare say, is the better purchase, because it's at least searchable, right? And you can litter it with bookmarks as necessary. Whereas this, I mean, you have a pretty deep contents, but it's fairly useless for looking anything up. So, yeah. Great content in terms of completeness, hampered horribly by a lack of easy reference. So then, in terms of substance, I mean, I want to give it a 4, but I just can't. Because it seems to have disconnected itself from the skirmish game. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. And it's just not easy to look anything up. They've done things to mitigate it, to be fair. Color-coded sections. You can see the colors shifting as they go through. Things like that. But it's not up to the task. It's not good enough. So, a high 3 for substance. Yeah. So, I don't like the change in system. I don't think it works as well. I don't think it's as elegant. It's removed the things that made me sing the praises of Heavy Gear and the silhouette system in the past. So I will no longer be doing so, and I'll be thinking about retrocloning silhouette in some way in its older form. All of that said, if they were to bring back Tribe 8, the system here would be perfectly cromulent for that, because scale doesn't really play a role in Tribe 8, and the stronger focus on interpersonal humanoid scale interactions in these rules is much better and much more applicable to Tribe 8. It doesn't fit Heavy Gear or the legacy of Heavy Gear or the point of the silhouette system as a whole, and that's a huge shame. So that's 3 plus 3. Fairly average scores overall, unfortunately. Star 3, Substance 3. Overall score 6 out of 10, 3 out of 5. Pretty much bang in the middle. If you're a huge Heavy Gear fan, or you like the sound of Heavy Gear but don't want to collect the old books, then this is probably a good way in. But I don't think it sells you on the things that made Heavy Gear popular back in the day, or made it such an effective system back in the day, or the things that made me so enthusiastic about it back in the day. It's unfortunate. Zang. Go back to where it all started for Postmortem Studios in 2004. Cloak of Steel, remade in French as Mantel d'Acier, created back when Postmortem Studios was trying to be a workers' cooperative. A magipunk fantasy setting of fortress cities and magical mecha. An OGL game with flexible magic and a well-developed world. One day, it'll get a new edition. Until then, You can get it at post-mort.com, drive-thru-rpg, and lulu.com.
Murder me and fuck my skull. Put my body in a vat of acid. Put my brain into a jar. Show it to your friends. Bring my teeth to the dentist, but the dentist